The Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello and welcome back to The Radical Secular. I'm Christoph Defoe.
I'm Sean Prophet.
Today, my friend Ari Venezia-Zahemski is here with us to discuss abortion and domestic violence, among other issues. Ari is a trained sexual assault and domestic violence advocate. But first, we'll talk to you about the election and its implications, and we'll check in with our friends protesting SARS in Nigeria. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash that red subscribe button. That shit is important as hell. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host. Especially, it's important that you write us a review on Apple. That helps us in the ratings and gets us on their page. Super important. Please do that. Also, tell your friends and your family about our show. Word of mouth matters. Also, if you're into reading like Sean and me, check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. Just Words Fallacy is a narrative companion to the Radical Secular podcast. Our most recent article discusses the emerging problem of deep fake digital media and the implications for democracy. The link is in the show notes. If you're interested in publishing your work on Just Words Fallacy, here is our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at @radicalsecular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Okay, now let's get into the shirts. You want to go first, Sean?
Sure, I will talk about my shirt. It is an Antifa.
Nice. I love it. So you got I love it. It's got this almost like Roman feel to it with the, I don't know what they call them on the sides, the leaves on the sides. It's got the 3 arrows going down, that classic sort of Antifa sort of look. I love it.
Yeah. And don't call it Antifa, because if you call it Antifa, then you know it's a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Antifa or Antifa, anti-fascist. That's what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
And the reason I'm wearing this shirt is because I'm so fucking pumped about the election, but we cannot let down our guard ever. This is a situation where this is a fight, and all this kumbaya talk about coming together and getting, and the divided country and the polarized country. It's like, come on. All right. We have serious differences with the other side in this country, which we talk about every week. So I'm not letting down my guard for a second.
I love it. And I think that's absolutely right. There is the kumbaya talk is already coming out. And interestingly, I'm wearing the same Joe Biden shirt I was wearing last week. Look, it's clean. It's clean. But we're having a friend of ours is coming over later on. And I also took a picture of some pictures out in the backyard wearing this shirt today. And it's just an amazing day. What a celebration. What a relief. I agree with you, though, and I think this is where you and I suspect here on the Radical Secular are going to split a little bit from the Biden crowd in terms of the kumbaya bullshit and the whole that we need to sort of accommodate that kind of bigotry on the right. So I am absolutely about our country pulling together, but not at the expense of basic values.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm very, very happy that it went this way, because I can only imagine what we'd be talking about right now if Trump had won the election. God. I mean, we would be, I can't even imagine. We dodged a fucking bullet here. Okay. And that is the truth. And it's still not, we may not have completely dodged it, because Trump is still tweeting. I mean, I just looked before we started taping, and he just tweeted out, "I got 71 million votes. How could I lose?" And so it's just like, dude, you lost. But
right. It's like, how you lost, dude? You lost because you got fewer votes than the other guy. Funny. That's how elections work. And you lost even though you tried to suppress the vote, and you still fucking lost, you fucking loser.
Absolutely. And we always talk about all the different handicaps, and we can get into that, as we get a little bit later in the show, but it is absolutely a miracle that Joe Biden pulled off an electoral college win. Even though the margins were small, he pulled off an electoral college win. And this just shows you he got 5 million at least more votes than Trump did. And still the margins in these states came down to these tiny numbers like, 10,000,
10,000 votes.
Yeah.
10,000 votes, 20,000 votes is what we're talking about. And this is what Obama, and we might as well just jump right into the election, right? Because we're going to be talking we're just going to be talking about the election, right? And what else is there to talk about, right?
Nothing to talk about.
So look, Obama spent the entire last, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the campaign that he was campaigning hard with the vote mask, right? And it said vote across it. And he said that, I remember back in 2016, people were like, he would mention Trump's name and people would like, boo, he would boo. And he said, don't boo, vote, and it really matters. Like, it doesn't even matter. It matters so much in these kinds of elections because we are talking about 10,000 votes, right? We are talking about, and by the way, we also have to correct for the fact that some portion of the electorate is going to be suppressed, right? So you have to take, we as Democrats and as progressives, Biden has to take that deficit into account, right? And on the right, they don't have to deal with any of that on the right.
We got to win by somewhere between 5 and 8% in order to actually win the election. And so, this is what I want to bring up about the polls, okay? Because there's this whole this whole narrative that came out after 2016. Oh, the polls were wrong, and even now they're saying again in 2020 the polls were wrong. I mean, that was one of Trump's ridiculous conspiracy theories in that despicable dictator speech that he gave the other night, which was just awful. One of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't even believe it. But anyway, his whole assertion there was that somehow these were voter suppression polls, meaning that by overstating Biden's support, that we would have convinced Republicans not to come out to the polls, which is
such a laughable concept. I mean, like, what are you talking about?
But this is the narrative from the right, and I'm going to say that the polls were fine in 2016, and they were fine this year as well, because I think what people are missing is that polls, they're trying to get. They're treating polls like as if it was a fortune teller. And I'm not just talking about, a scam fortune teller. I'm talking about somebody who really could foretell the future. And that's not what polls are. Polls are statistical analysis, and they're only as good as the data that you start with, for one thing. And that data is getting harder and harder to collect than it used to be because people aren't picking up their phones. There's no landlines. And we got shifting demographics, and we have one entire political party that does not want to be polled. They believe that pollsters are part of the deep state, and they're suspicious of pollsters, or they will lie to pollsters. So even against the backdrop of all that interference, what you're actually measuring is not who's going to vote. You're measuring sentiment, and you're measuring that sentiment among different groups. We've got likely voters, we've got registered voters, we've got the entire population. You're doing a sample size to try to determine the outcome of the election, but you're not really able to know who's going to go and show up on election day. And you're not covering things like the ballot drop boxes being court ordered to be removed in certain counties in Texas. You're not counting what's going to happen if the post office slows the mail and doesn't deliver these ballots on time. You're not counting what's going to happen if, ballots are rejected or lost or not counted or segregated, they're returned late. All of these things are, when you do an opinion poll, you're just measuring sentiment among people who picked up their phones. And even with that, the polls were still within the margin of error.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like we got some happy Biden people outside your place.
Yeah. There's there are definitely some. That's really interesting. Great point, because when the news dropped, it was like I was sitting outside having some coffee actually at the time, because it's like absurdly warm here in New Jersey for this time of year. It's like something like 70 degrees, 22 degrees Celsius or something, which is like really warm for this time of year. In fact, I'm going to go on a motorcycle trip next week for 2 days because like it's that warm. And so I'm like, fuck it. I'm getting out of here. I've been stressed out for a fucking week and I want to blow off some fucking steam. But yeah, so there are some Biden beepers out there. But I think that's really interesting. And because something that I want to talk to you about, because you and we both suffered through this week like everyone else did, right? But we both approached the stress of this week very differently, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But we were both obviously super stressed out. So from my perspective, like my view, and I wonder how many of our listeners will like sort of see themselves in these various camps or whatever. Not that they're opposing, but you know what I mean. Because for me, right, my instinct was to not look at polls. My instinct was to put my phone on do not disturb and focus on work. Like I was talking to my wife earlier. I was like, I had one of the most productive work weeks I've had in a really long time because I was like just staring at my screen and trying to pretend like that I wasn't feeling pins and needles every other moment. And so I obviously still wanted to know what was going on, and I wanted to know how things were progressing, but I, in the first instance, expected a red wave on election night. I was disappointed when the blue wave didn't materialize on election night, such that we could just be done with it, right? Like Florida, like we took Florida or something like that, right? But so I was dealing with that stress, but I didn't want to deal with like the sort of horse race element of it, like the up, the down, the roller coaster. Oh my God, this county, that county. Like maybe this time I did that last time around. But I didn't do it this time around. And maybe I was a little bit scarred from that experience. I don't know. But anyway, Sean, what about you? Like how like, I know you have a totally different approach to stress.
Well, I tend to go into it. I tend to doom scroll. That's how I've kept myself sane for pretty much the entire 4 years of the Trump presidency so far, was really just getting into what's going on, what's happening. Is there looking for some glimmer of hope that this was going to come to an end? So as various things happened, as various Trump scandals broke, as the impeachment happened, all these things, I would get my hopes up and then have them dashed again. And so in this situation, I was really just hanging on the edge of my seat for like 5 days. And It was tough to get sleep. The first night, I really had hoped that we would see something approaching what the polls had said in Florida, which is that we were going to win Florida by 1 or 2 points. But what was interesting is, getting back to these polls, is that Nate Silver had posted a chart showing what the results would be if there were a 2016 style polling error of about 3%. And that actually ended up being pretty much how the election played out. And that showed us losing Florida. But it did show us within striking distance of getting Georgia, and I think it was New Hampshire, and then Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania. And so it showed some of the blue wall states also being within reach with a 3% polling error. And so I think that's kind of what that's the new sort of rule of thumb for elections when you're talking about polling right now, although there is no rule of thumb because you've got these outliers. And so, but I think if the poll of polls, if you stay right in the center of that and then you add 3% for Republicans, is kind of where we are. And that's how the election played out.
That's interesting. And there is a backlash, as we know, against institutions in general. You and I talked about this before the show earlier today, because there is a general sentiment in America, and especially among conservatives, that the media is corrupt, right? That distrust of experts, distrust of institutions, and I lump in some ways pollsters in with that same sort of establishment, right? And so I think that it's really easy for people to just jump on the bashing polls sort of train and say, look, and I hate it because it's another way of saying, well, look, my vote, like, it doesn't matter anyway. They're just a bunch of bums. You can't trust any of them. Let me go back to my little provincial world and go back to my other area ways of understanding the world, which is authority, religion, gut instinct, right? The tradition, all these things that are stand in for information providing when you don't trust experts?
Well, think of the analogy that I used earlier, which was of a fortune teller. Everybody wants a fortune teller. We'd all love to be able to foretell the future. And so this is what polls offer us. They offer us a glimpse of the future and how something's going to turn out that's a very uncertain outcome. And so you're going to be let down because there is no way to foretell the future. It's an impossible dream. If people could take a step back and understand that this is a tendency, this is a projection, this is an estimate, and really look at it with a sense of statistical uncertainty, which is what it is. The polling errors are anywhere from 3 to 4%, and they can be in either direction. That's a big spread.
That's a big spread. Yeah. 8 points, right? Potentially 8-point spread, right? I mean, that's big.
Yeah, it's huge. And so when you're dealing in a situation where Democrats consistently have to win by 5 to 8 points to even get elected, this was a landslide. But it wasn't measured properly. It wasn't captured properly by the voting. I mean, if anybody wants to talk about election rigging, the Republicans have rigged elections permanently in this country.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I heard recently, and I thought it was really great analysis, that we live in a center-left country with a center-right voting apparatus, right?
That's right.
And it's set up for minority rule. And it's set up for minority rule precisely because of white supremacy and racism, because that was the bargain that was struck at the very beginning, right? Let's let the rural states get disproportionate power, right? That was the only way to get them on board. I want to sort of, a friend of mine named Meg, I'll when we do the show notes, I'll have to do a shout out to her because she sent me an article, and I'll also do the article. And I don't remember the name of the article, but it was really fascinating. And it was about this, I think I want to say, I can't remember who he's, it's an American professor of some kind. And he has a polling system it's not a polling system. It's developed. It's called 12 keys. And if the president, the incumbent president, right, hits 6 or fewer of these keys, I think it works.
I know the article you're talking about.
You know the article I'm talking about. And he has predicted correctly, like election after election after election after election, including Biden, and including Trump.
Yes.
In 2016. And so when I read that maybe a week before the election, and I remember reading that and saying to myself, this makes a lot of sense. And I got a strange sense of security from that.
That's probably why you didn't have to sit there and watch 5 days worth of election returns.
Maybe that's why. Yeah, maybe that's why. I remember after reading that saying to myself, you know what? I think we're going to win this. I actually tweeted that out. I tweeted that. Like at that point, I was like, we're going to win, I think.
It did begin to start to feel a little bit like fate as the numbers started to tick up and as these mail-in ballots came in. And I knew that when Biden came out and he said, we've got this, don't worry. I knew that his campaign team had been talking to the vote counters.
Right.
Because there's a way, these guys know what's going on long before this stuff is announced on CNN. And that's better than polling because you've got data from those districts. And what I wanted to talk about is that the Georgia win was something that nobody really predicted that it was. It was possible from Nate Silver, but on the New York Times site, they had the needle going back and forth. And as the Georgia votes started to roll in, it kind of went over to where it became much less likely that Biden would win. And then it started coming back. And it ended the night, the first night, with a 0.4% Biden lead as the predicted final outcome. And the reason they knew that is because they were able to actually see how many votes there were left to be counted. They only had that data on 3 states. It was Florida and Georgia and North Carolina. And so they were able to look, precinct by precinct and see how many votes were still out there. And they nailed it. They nailed it on all 3. They predicted Florida was gone, North Carolina was gone, but Georgia was in play for Biden. And the final total of Georgia is looking like to come out about 0.2% lead for Biden, and they projected 0.4. So that's the kind of scientific election analysis that works. And so between Nate Silver and that sort of election day analysis and your guy that you're talking about with the keys to the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the types of things that we can look at going forward as being accurate. But there is no crystal ball, and that's the real thing that people have to understand about polling. It's not a crystal ball.
Yeah, and this just goes to show, right, how we human beings, we always like to talk about, we humans as the human animal, right? Our craving for certainty is remarkable, right? Our brains are pattern detectors, right? So we see certainty where there isn't, and we bias and we crave it. And so it's really easy to think, and by the way, right, religion is all about that, right? It's being able to predict what happens when you die. Right?
Yeah, we have no idea. We'd rather have a false certitude of what happens after we die than live with the uncertainty. And that's the same thing with polling.
Exactly. And then we get all bent out of shape when the polling doesn't exactly connect with our prediction, and we shouldn't. And I think that's a really important point. I'm really glad you brought that up. Now, what do you think, Sean, like in terms of wins, right? What are you excited about coming out of this election? Because we also have to talk about the shitty things, right? But let's talk about the good things.
The good news is that when Biden gets into office, he has full control over the government bureaucracy. He has control over the cabinet. He has control over the Justice Department. He has control over the tone of the country, foreign policy. He can mend immediately these relationships, or at least get them on the mend, that have been broken and disrupted over the past several years. He can make trade policy as Trump did. Trump put those tariffs on, Biden can take them off. He can rejoin the Paris Agreement. He can do all of these things that are executive branch authorities. What he is going to have a hard time doing is passing any sweeping legislation such as healthcare or the Green New Deal or anything like that, or expanding the Supreme Court, unless we can take those last two Senate runoff elections in Georgia, which that's a tall order, let me tell you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that is a huge uphill battle for us. But like you say, with all the hand wringing that we've been dealing with on the left after this election, despite how happy we've been, there's a lot of hand wringing. But like you say, the executive branch is incredibly powerful, and whatever changes that we might be able to push through, and whatever ways that we can improve people's lives, it begins with the executive branch. If you don't have that, like even if we had both legislative houses and not the executive, we could it would just be vetoed, right? So it doesn't matter, right? So
that's right.
So the executive branch is critical, and the executive branch sets, like you said, Sean, I cannot sort of emphasize this enough, sets the tone for the country. And we saw hate crimes go up. We saw domestic violence go up. We saw these things go up during the Trump era. We saw bullying go up during the Trump era, right? And that had nothing to do with legislation, right? No. That had to do with the tone that was being set from the top. And then foreign policy, the foreign policy thing is fucking huge.
It's huge.
Huge, because now we can rejoin the global community, right? We can go back, we can rejoin the global community as the leaders we're supposed to be.
We won't immediately gain the trust that we've lost, but it's a process of building it. And I think a lot of foreign countries and their leaders understand that we were basically attacked. We had a civil war going on. We had a civil war president who was not representing the interests of our country. So the old foreign policy establishment can now reassert itself, and we can try to patch over the world order as it's been ripped apart in the last 4 years. And I think we'll be pretty successful. I think China wants to deal. I think so too. I think our allies are going to be overjoyed that we're talking to them again. I think that there's going to be some gnashing of teeth with all the kind of the crap they tried to do with Israel, and and Saudi Arabia and kind of these fake peace deals that they brokered over there, I think are probably going to run into some trouble going forward. But it's only 4 years, right? And this is the problem that a lot of other countries are going to have dealing with us, is that they don't know what's coming in 2024. So
yeah, still a lot of uncertainty there, right?
Yeah.
A ton of uncertainty. I do think, though, and I made this analogy earlier today when you and I talked, and that is we have been under occupation. The United States has been under occupation for 4 years. And so we had an occupying army, occupying the White House, occupying the executive branch, and and what we are doing now. And the analogy continues, right? It was a 4-year ordeal. And during this past week, we were dealing with, it was like the last 4 years was like living under a Nazi occupation, and then like a totalitarian occupation. And so we all found ways to cope. We all found ways to get on with our lives and fight and resist. And then this was like D-Day when the paratroopers were jumping into France, and the last week was like that. So we were sitting in our homes, anxiety. We didn't know, right? When the Allies jumped into France, it was not clear that they were going to win. It was not clear that they were going to win. And even though they had overwhelming force, the Nazis were entrenched, and they were determined, and they were ready, and they were good. And so now we are living in a world. We are living now, like today was like VE Day. Today was like the lifting of the occupation. And so, yes, I think that, but to get back to your point, I think that other countries, I think we'll see it that way, especially with someone like Joe Biden, which is nice that he's been around for so long. So he has these relationships with these foreign ministers, right? He has ran for president so many times, and he wasn't the man for those moments, but he was the man. He was the precise man for this moment. And this was also a really, really big day for women. Look, women, another glass ceiling has been broken. There are many more glass ceilings to break, but this is another one has been broken. This is a big win for Black women who have literally saved democracy again. Right? Georgia is now a swing state. Look,
because of Stacey Abrams, and Stacey Abrams should get the Congressional Medal of Freedom. I swear,
she really should. She really fucking should, man.
I think Biden can probably make that happen. I mean, if Trump can give it to Rush fucking Limbaugh, I think
fucking insult.
It's such an insult. But it's still like, we know all of those medals were given out under occupation, so they don't count.
Exactly.
They don't count. And we're not going to let them count. It's absurd, and it still does have meaning. Under the properly constituted government of the United States, a Congressional Medal of Freedom does have meaning.
Exactly.
And so she should get it. And we have to remember that these margins, the margins in these states are in some cases entirely people of color. In most cases, because there's those maps that came out after the 2016 election, who would win what state if only so-and-so voted. And in the case of Black women, Democrats win 50 states.
Yep.
In the case of white people, I think Democrats would win like 3 states.
Right, it's astonishing. I mean, it's really. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sean. Finish your.
In the case of white men, Democrats would win 0 states, not even California.
Wow, and that's what's wild. Not even California or New York. Like that's what right. The fuck, man. Well,
so the margins in Arizona, for example, 80,000 Native Americans came out to vote, and the margin in Arizona is something like 20,000. So without those Native Americans coming out to vote, state goes for Trump. Same thing in Georgia. Same thing in Philly, Detroit, Atlanta. That is Milwaukee. All people of color coming out to support the Democratic Party and save America, to kick out this Nazi occupation of our country.
Exactly, man. And I as I was preparing for the show, I was reminded, and I think I brought this up every single show since I started reading the fucking book. But Black Reconstruction by Du Bois, and I didn't realize the extent of. Let me put it another way: Black people have been saving this union for a long time. The Civil War, the Union would have lost the Civil War, at least arguably, without Black soldiers. There just wasn't enough. And so, Black people have in 2018, right? 2018, that was the same thing, right? And then of course 2008 and 2012. But the point is that, and I said this to my wife yesterday, is that in some ways, Black people protect progressive white people from all of those batshit white supremacists out there, right? The fucking Confederates, right? Black people are the black wall that defends decency and democracy in this country, because white men, especially white men, cannot be trusted to vote in any way other than what enhances their own personal interests.
That's right. And we have to think about this strategically, because one of the issues is that if we don't take the Senate and we don't pass sweeping legislation to make the lives of Black people better, the same thing might happen to us again in 2024 or 2028, where you get another white supremacist running and Black people are like, well, Democrats really didn't help me. And so they either stay home or they vote Republican, because in this election, somehow Trump was able to get through and he increased his support among Black people by several percentage points. And he also dramatically increased his support among Latinos, particularly the Cubans and the Venezuelans, but also among Mexicans living along the Texas border. They've been hitting these guys hard with these anti-socialism messages. And it comes down to the fact that with Latinos, there is a chord that the Trumpists can strike inside of Latino families and Latino communities, because even though they are very, very nasty to immigrants and they insult Latinos all the time, there's a resonance with a core of conservatism that happens, particularly religious conservatism. Catholicism is very big, anti-abortion policy is very big. And so they're making inroads. And this is where we have to stop looking at ethnic groups as monolithic and as voting blocks, because when they were smaller, they were easy to take for granted for Democrats. And now Democrats are going to have to work just as hard on each ethnic group as they have on white people.
So true. And that is so important, because, and, it's really interesting, right? Because this is the problem when we talk about monolithic groups, right? It's very white centric, American centric, white culture centric to think of, oh no, we are a diverse group of people with various different ideas and views and concepts, but they are just one block of people. And it's not even just a white thing, right? I mean, this is a human thing, right? We look at the out group as just one block of people, not as individuals. They're a horde, essentially, right? And so the Democratic Party is roundly and rightly criticized for not picking apart and just assuming, oh, all Latinos must hate Trump because Trump is bad to Latinos. And that is just not true. And I think I wanted to pile on to what you said in terms of the abortion issue for Latinos, conservative, and the Catholicism issue. And the third issue there is the patriarchy, and those things are all obviously intertwined. But I want to parse out the patriarchy, because I was speaking to a friend of mine who came over, and I'm hoping to get him on the show one of these days. And I'm going to. His name is Razib, amazing dude, super smart. We actually went to the same law school at the same time, but we didn't know each other then. Nice. And we subsequently became friends when he was a friend of my. A friend of a friend, and we became friends. Anyway, super smart guy, really interesting guy. And he came by my house he was in the neighborhood. He came by and we talked, social distance talked with masks. And he's a progressive, and he was saying that he's of Bangladeshi descent. And he was telling me that he knows more than one, a non-negligible number of Bangladeshi Americans who are Muslims who are voting for Trump, who voted for Trump. And, And you have the same phenomenon with Latino men. And here's the thing, Sean, and black men as well. And those numbers have gone up among black men, and it's not black women, because 91% of black women voted for Biden, right? It's black men. That's where those numbers are going up for conservatives. Mm-hmm. And the theme that continues through all of this is like, look, I want to be able to dominate my wife.
That's
right?
the bargain.
That's the bargain. That's the bargain. I'll vote for you. But I just want to be able to dominate my family, dominate my wife, all this woman being powerful stuff. I don't like that shit. And by the way, Trump is the quintessential sort of warrior for that old misogynistic, submissive woman approach.
Well, and it comes down to the issue of political correctness and cancel culture, which we've talked about.
That's another important one.
A million times. And something on the order of 80% of Americans hate the idea of political correctness and hate the idea of cancel culture. It is a slam dunk. It is like a decimating attack when someone accuses you of cancel culture or political correctness, even though we understand, and we talk about this all the time, that these are just simple accountability that we're trying to establish for men. But men see this as such a threat that they are willing to essentially hurt themselves, vote for somebody who's going to hurt themselves and destroy the country, just so that they don't have to ever be hassled about their language or their treatment of women. Absolutely right, man. Absolutely right. And look, it's classic. And there are always people. There are always people who are willing to trade in their integrity in some ways, right? And vote against their interests and act against their interests and act against their group's interests, right? For their own personal, that bargain you talked about, right? They're willing to make that bargain if it means that for them, it's going to be a win for them in some way. Well, it goes back to Jonathan Haidt, who we like to rip on, but he made some very, very good points in his book, The Righteous Mind, and he talked about the elephant and the rider. And I think for a lot of men, the rider is like, okay, yeah, I should be fair and just and everything else like that, but the elephant is going in a different direction. Great analogy. The elephant is like, I don't want this bullshit. I want to be able to, be caveman, the chest beating sort of thing it becomes this overwhelming emotional imperative for them. And was it Robert Heinlein that said you can sway 1,000 men by appealing to their prejudices easier than you can sway one man by reason? And that's right. That's what's going on here with these guys. That's why this was such an incredible coup in this election, because we overcame all of that and all of the voter suppression, everything else like that. And enough people actually voted with their minds as opposed to their emotions this time, that we were able to get a 4-year respite from fascism. And we're going to need to fight very hard for the next 4 years to make sure that we can frame the arguments properly, so that we are appealing to people's emotions and not trying to have these, because we can all argue all day long that defund the police doesn't mean defund the police. Right. And I get mad at people all the time for conceding that argument to the right wing. But the fact is that when somebody says defund the police, what other people hear is, I'm not going to be safe. Exactly. And we have to come up with an emotional response to that, an emotional argument. Why I do believe that because Black Lives Matter coined that phrase, and they coined it for a reason, we have to continue to support it and go and to show, not tell, show America what that means. I think that's right, and important in terms of Black Lives Matter. And I think we should go and talk about the other sort of all of the shitty things that and the uphill battles that we're going to be facing. But in terms of I think you're absolutely right. Black Lives Matter was defund the police back when Black Lives Matter was coined, right? Like it was as incendiary back then. So the idea that incendiary names don't work, or that the Black people, the Black community, the Black organizers who came up with these ideas don't know what they're talking about is absurd. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, they have single-handedly made Black Lives Matter. It's written on the street in Washington, D.C., for fuck's sake, right? Like, and so defund the police is designed to jar people, right? Yes. It's designed to get people's attention.
suppression. That is what activism is. That's what activism is, you know?
We need the payoff. We need the payoff, though.
Yes, absolutely. I want to, just before we move on, because I do want to start talking about what we have to do to move forward here. I want to just give the press a shout out, right? Like we can rail against the press all we want, but if the press hadn't done its job for 4 years, and the press did its job in an unprecedented way in the last 4 years, the press got off its ass, right? And look, we can criticize them for not taking X, Y, and Z seriously enough, or for both sizing things, and there is a good argument to be had there. But ultimately, and I wrote a couple things down because, like, especially during this election, right? They have called Trump a liar, right? They called out voter suppression, right? They were not hysterical about this election. They were clear-eyed with the American people and said, no, the president just got up there and lied. And look, 4 years ago, that was something that the press was too scared to do. The press is everyone's favorite punching bag, and I get that. But without them, we would be in even worse situation as a country than we are right now.
Horrible. The mainstream press has really held its own and has proved its worth. And I think what I object to the most when people start attacking the media is that the media is diverse. And you have this, if you look at the chart of the media, they show the ones that are more centrist and the ones that are more right and left. And it's from Ad Fontes Media. I could put that in the show notes. But you have to understand that this is an ecosystem. It's a landscape. And the fringe outlets on the chart are despicable.
Despicable
on both sides. And, but the factual reporting that goes on in that center bubble of the chart is really great. And
I know the chart. It's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's more reliable than ever. And a lot of people will say, oh, again, it's the same attack on institutions as when you attack the polls, attack the media.
Yes.
It is a lazy, absolutely preposterous attack that doesn't hold an ounce of water. Because if you read New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, The Economist, The Guardian, you could just rattle on. You could, CNN, ABC, MSNBC. You look at the mainstream news media; it is more accurate than ever.
Exactly. And the attack on it is this sort of anti-intellectual attack that we've been seeing, and it emerges from the right because their policies are not reasonable. And so, right. So you have to then, if you are on the right, you have to then attack the fact checkers, right? Because your entire policy is premised on lies. So the last thing you want to do is to have fact checkers out there telling everybody that you're lying to them. And so you have to discredit the fact checkers.
Well, that's it. And the fact checkers, they are the only ones who are really pushing back against right-wing media lies. And then so the right-wingers will say the fact checkers are biased. And then you've just isolated. And this is to the point where Trump has gotten so bad with his lying that he is now trying to insist that the entire media, the entire world is completely getting this election wrong. To the point where he's the only one. He's the only, Fox News called it. All of his allies in the media, even the most right-wing media, called this election. And there's Trump still saying that, oh, this is wrong. They're all lying. It's all fraud. And you get to the point where, how far can this go?
Exactly. It's fucking crazy, man. But look, so oh boy, the things that we have to work on, and we're kind of short on time, but we have to hit this. And so I want to talk about sort of the red flags, right, that this election has revealed. And first of all, a lot of, I think, liberals and progressives wanted a full-throated repudiation of Trumpism. We did not get that. I just wanted to read something really quick. It'll take about a minute. And it was about this New York Times piece that I read recently, an opinion piece that was really outstanding. And I just some excerpts from it. And I'd like to get your sort of response to it, Sean. For as much as it seems that Donald Trump has changed something about the character of this country, the truth is he hasn't. What is terrible about Trump is also terrible about the United States. everything we've seen in the last 4 years, the nativism, the racism, the corruption, the wanton exploitation of the weak and unconcealed contempt for the vulnerable, is as much a part of the American story as our highest ideals and aspirations. And to the extent that Americans feel a sense of loss about the Trump era, they should be grateful, because it means they've given up their illusions about what this country is and what it has been capable of. There is very little about Donald Trump or his policies that doesn't have a direct antecedent in America's past. The president's racism harkens right back to the first decades of the 20th century, when white supremacy was ascendant and the nation's political elites, including presidents like Woodrow Wilson, were preoccupied with segregation and exclusion for the sake of preserving an Anglo-Saxon nation. Trump's indifference to the pandemic is in the same way an echo of the Hoover administration, which stood by as the country was crushed by economic depression and the immiseration of millions of Americans. The president's lawlessness and that of his administration is a direct outgrowth of a contempt for accountability that stretches across 4 decades of Republican presidencies, from Nixon to Bush. Americans hold many illusions about the kind of nation in which we live. We tell ourselves that we're the freest country in the world, that we have the best system of government, and that we welcome all comers, that we're efficient and dynamic, where the rest of the world is stagnant and dysfunctional. Some of those things have been true at some points in the past, but none of them is true at this point in time. What Trump has done is made it difficult to maintain the illusion.
Yeah, man. I mean, that is spot on, and you can't solve a problem that you don't acknowledge. And we already know that that America is like a carnival funhouse mirror of itself because of things like voter suppression and the Electoral College. We don't really know what this country would be like if we were actually allowed to vote. And so what we have is this illusion of democracy, which we've talked about many times. And we have this illusion of equality, which obviously doesn't exist. And so Trumpism and the Trump era really pulled back the curtain in a way that now we can't deny it. And I hope that we, moving forward, that people don't try to sort of get lulled back to sleep by the fact that we've got a real president.
Exactly. And right. Oh, wow. That is so important, Sean, because, right, one of my biggest pet peeves, and I know this is actually one of Obama's pet peeves because he talks about it all the time. And I am an Obama Democrat. I love that man, as I like saying that a lot. But one of his pet peeves is like, right, we won in 2008 and then no one showed up in 2010 for the midterms, right? And we won in 2012 and nobody showed up in 2014 for the midterms, right? So the point is that, like, those wins lulled we Americans to sleep, and everyone was like, oh, well, let's just move on with our lives. Obama's got it. I actually remember thinking that to myself, literally, Obama's got it, right? Everything's fine.
The turnout, it goes presidential election, midterms, presidential election, midterms. And what happens is that right now we're hanging on by a razor's edge in the House. We lost seats in the House. We lost we lost one state house to Republicans, and it's 2020, which means that whoever's in charge in the state houses gets to draw the maps for the next decade. So this is going to affect the next round of voter suppression. And Rick Santorum was on CNN, and he literally said that. He was like, oh yeah, well, this is a pretty good night for Republicans because we held the Senate and we get to draw the maps for the next decade. It's like, well, thanks for giving away the game that you're just planning on stealing all these elections for the next decade in all these American states because you can.
Exactly. It's so similarly, I flipped over to Fox and they were like doing, everyone has the big screen now. John King on CNN is like,
he's the best.
He started it and he's the best. Like, I remember back in the day, like in 2004, right? Like he had the most rudimentary screen. Like my computer screen is like better than that now, but like he had the most rudimentary. Now it's like this like insane digital display. Like, anyway, the point is that like the guy on Fox, he's talking and he goes into, and he's looking at Pennsylvania. He goes to Philadelphia and he's like, if you're a Republican, you want to make sure if you're a Republican, you want to make sure turnout is low in Philadelphia. And I was like, wait a second, you're just giving away the fucking game, man. Like, no. You don't get to, like, your goal isn't shouldn't be to depress turnout. Like, that's not how an election's supposed to fucking work.
Well, Trump has blown that wide open now by basically claiming, he was like, stop the count in Pennsylvania while he was ahead and then count all the votes in Arizona where he was behind. It's just like, come on, dude. Nobody is fooling anyone anymore. Democracy has become procedural. entirely procedural.
Exactly. And look, I mean, I want to point out something about those we lost the down ballot outcomes like you were talking about, right? So the house losses we lost, and I did a little bit of digging on this. A lot of those house seats were in seats that we won in 18 against odds, right? So they were in sort of purple districts, red districts, et cetera. The second piece is, so we shouldn't be too surprised that we lost those in this election. Also, Republicans peeled off of Trump, but they didn't. So they may not have voted for Trump as enthusiastically as they could have. But those same Republicans would still vote down ballot for Republicans, right? They're still Republicans. Right. They hate Trump, but they're still Republicans. And so I think that's like an important sort of caveat here as we think about these down ballot sort of losses. And of course, there was a lot of down ballot wins. I mean, New Jersey legalized marijuana.
Absolutely.
Oregon decriminalized drugs in general,
which is amazing.
Which is amazing, fucking awesome, right? I want to go to fucking Oregon and just have a field day. Then Mississippi legalized medical marijuana, for fuck's sake. Like holy shit. I mean, and then a trans woman. Reading this now, Sarah McBride has won her Delaware Senate race, poising her to become the first and only openly transgender state senator in the United States and the highest ranking transgender official in the entire United States. Huge win.
Yeah, and that's really great. And I'm really happy for all of those down ballot races. I just have to, though, keep harping on the fact that it's almost a certainty that we will lose more House seats in 2022.
True.
Unless we can do a Stacey Abrams style registration and turnout operation for the midterms. And that's going to be more important than ever because if we lose the House and the Senate, Biden will be a lame duck president. And then that we have the same problem in 2024 where all the progressives are going to say, you didn't do anything.
It's very, very true. I think that's absolutely right. And first of all, there's obviously the Georgia Senate races. That goes without saying, but that's a huge uphill battle. But like you say, so I think the silver lining, and this is me being an Obama Democrat again, and being optimistic and hopeful, and that is the silver lining of there still being a fight to be had is that people are more engaged. Liberals and progressives are more engaged now than ever. And so, right. And because we didn't have a shutdown win, like there's still this anxiety of like, oh my God, like, right. Like the problems are still here. Mitch McConnell's going to show up on day one and obstruct and be the piece of shit that he is and continue to be a really good boogeyman. We talked about earlier about emotional appeal, right? Turning him into a boogeyman. He is the Grim Reaper as far as we're concerned, right? Also, the Supreme Court I think will keep people animated because like basically shitty things are going to keep fucking happening for fucking 2 years, Like we can't stop that much.
Well, and that's the next chance to take the Senate is going to be in 2022, because what's going to happen is that Biden is going to sign some executive orders and they're going to get overturned by the Supreme Court. And there's going to be other things that are going to happen. We may lose Obamacare. There are other things, really, really bad things that the Supreme Court is going to do under Biden's term. And if we don't have the Senate, we're not going to be able to do anything in terms of even getting federal judges' appointments approved by the Senate. I mean, it's just going to be... It's always been total warfare. And I think that Mitch McConnell may end up working with Biden on some stimulus and some things that help Wall Street, right? Because those guys are owned by Wall Street. And as long as it's going to help Wall Street first, they'll let a little bit of aid through that will get to the rest of the economy.
Trickle down to the rest of us.
So that's what I think we could see from Mitch McConnell. We're not going to get anything on racial justice other than what we can do with the Justice Department with consent decrees and policing. But as far as legislation is concerned, as far as gun legislation, we're going to be frozen out again, just like under Obama.
Yeah, I want to push back on that because I agree with you, first of all, in that sense. But I do. But my silver lining issue here is, again, we are liberals and progressives are engaged in a way that they never were, right? Like people know obscure Senate rules and shit, like, right? People who didn't even know what a majority whip was, right? But now, like the Joe Schmo liberal, in all these Facebook groups and whatever, knows what that is. My point is that like people are off the bench in a way that they weren't in 2010. And secondly, African Americans especially African American women, are increasingly becoming not just subsistence living. And when you're not, when you're not subsistence living, you can start paying attention to what's going on around you, right? And when you start paying time around you, you become part of the middle class, or at least the upper lower class, right? Or the lower middle class, whatever. The point is, like, you start realizing how abstract principles and abstract policies affect your actual day-to-day life. And so what I have been walking around and I've seen, I remember as a young person, or for most of my life, if I talk to a Black person, they don't talk like I do, right? But now more and more I run into Black. Now, it's true, of course, that I now occupy a sort of a middle class environment. And so it's more likely the Black people I do interact with, but still I've seen a level of engagement, a level of understanding of the issues and education and all these things that makes me hopeful going forward in terms of the electorate from that perspective.
I hope so. I mean, because you are the upper echelon. I mean, Georgetown law degree and all of that, right? You're the upper echelon. So there are people that you're not going to see too many people like you. Right. Yeah. Right.
And that's unusual. And so, but like, even when I'm walking around and I just interact with your, run of the mill Black person, like the experience of doing that in 2020, from my perspective, being who I am and my level of education and how I was brought up, and the privilege, frankly, being a privileged guy. But like my experience interacting with Joe Schmo Black person these days, it's very different than it used to be. Like there is just a level of sophistication that I hadn't seen in the past. And so that is what, especially among Black women, is what is inspiring. And look, we have Kamala Harris, like Black women carried Biden across the finish line. And I think that the numbers are going to, in the end, when those numbers come out and the statistics come out, that's going to be clear. And I think that, that group of women, that group of people is going to be pretty enthusiastic about Kamala Harris and the rising star that is Stacey Abrams. If I'm Biden, I put her in a very prominent place in my orbit. I don't care where it is, but she needs to be like the face of this motherfucker.
Absolutely. And one final thought about
go for it, man.
Kamala Harris is that we in this country have no experience. We don't know what it's like to have someone as capable as her in the White House. She is going to do things that we can't even imagine. And what she's going to unleash in terms of activism and people who are following in her footsteps lower down, we cannot, this moment, and it's like, I posted this on Facebook the other day, is that Biden's a big fucking deal. Those are his words, by the way, on the passage of Obamacare.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Classic.
He's a big fucking deal, but Kamala is a bigger fucking deal for the entire country, for our history, for everything. This is an earthquake. Having her as vice president, a heartbeat away from the presidency, and likely president someday. And that's it. That's all I got. I think it's going to be that's a huge bright spot in spite of any other problems that we have.
Right. And there are many problems. and look, we're going to be talking to Ari in a few minutes. And, I want, and, in terms of women and women's issues and women empowerment, you cannot, and glass ceilings being broken. I know what it felt like when Barack Obama was elected as a person of color. So I can only imagine what that must be like for a woman seeing Kamala Harris, right, beat the odds, school that shitbag Pence, and then walk on that stage and claim victory. It's like, it must be incredibly. It's powerful for me. And so I can only imagine how powerful it must be for a woman and for young women and for girls and women and girls and women who want who can be inspired and see someone up there on the stage that looks like them, right, and has similar experiences to them.
The whole lineup in elementary school of all the presidents, and you've got all these white presidents that go along, and then there's Barack Obama at the end, the black president. Okay, well, if you did a similar line with vice presidents, there's never been a black vice president. So
exactly.
Now we've got both categories covered, and we've got a woman. It's huge. It's huge,
man. It's fucking huge. And so like this, I think that's a perfect way to move on. And I just want, before we move on, we don't have time to really get into it. I would have liked to, but I would just want to just mention, shout out to our friend Ade in Nigeria. He has been listening to the show, and I messaged with him on Facebook quite a bit. And I read a story that I thought was super powerful. There was a guy named Anthony Uonde, and he gave his life for a better Nigeria. And he was just an average guy, but what he ended up with a machete in his head, and died trying to get help. And he did that because he stepped in the way of thugs that were hired by the government to go and beat up protesters, right? And he stood in the way, and he got beaten up a couple times, but he kept doing it, and he did this over the course of an extended period of time. And eventually, they came at him with a machete, and he got a machete to the skull, and he died. And he's become a martyr for the movement. And this is a guy who is well loved. He's a really big guy. He tried, but didn't end up trying to get into the military to go fight Boko Haram. He loved Nigeria. He wanted to see a new Nigeria. And this is what they're up against there. And I just think it's really important that we on this show realize that the United States is not the whole world. And we are just some tiny portion of it.
4% of the world's population.
Exactly. And we want to highlight the life and death of Anthony Uonde, that civil rights hero who gave his life for a better Nigeria. So I just wanted to sort of to highlight that. We can't go into it in too much detail, but don't worry. We will be back on Africa next week, assured. Here. So let's move on to our guest segment now. I am pleased to introduce my friend, Ari Venezia-Zahemski. Ari is a first-generation American and daughter of Holocaust survivors. She was raised on social action, social justice, and progressive politics, as well as Star Trek. Ari's work at National Project Committed. She works at a national project committed to promoting transparency and crime reporting. The project grew out of a need for more incident-based information about hate crimes, as well as domestic violence and sex crimes from police departments. She's also a trained sexual assault and domestic violence advocate. And so, without further ado, here's Ari. Hey, Ari, welcome to the show. We're glad you're here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Now, tell us about your shirt. My
shirt is very special to me. It says, "Keep your theology off my biology." And it harkens back to my very first bumper sticker, which said, "Keep your laws off my body." I couldn't find a "Keep your laws off my body" t-shirt because I don't know why I couldn't find one. They were not available to me. I did a lot of searching for this t-shirt. I have several runners up that I did not wear today. This was the winner, and it's the closest I could get.
Well, that's awesome because obviously that's sort of the theme of what we're talking about here today, but also it's just a fucking awesome sentiment. And also that just means that we'll have to have you on the show again so you can wear the other t-shirts down the road.
Ah, yes.
All right. So look, Sean Sean and I already talked about the election in depth, but we want, and look, we'll get into the main topic of our conversation for today with you, but obviously, like we talked about earlier, Ari, the donkey in the room, not the elephant, but the donkey in the room today is the fucking election. So I think it's really important that we hear from you, our guest, like, where are you with this? How are you feeling with this? How excited are you?
I'm so excited. I'm elated. I'm a little bit also heartbroken. As you know, Christoph, my dad died from COVID in April. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So my first thought was, I was actually out with some friends this morning having coffee when someone looked up from their phone and said they called it for Biden. And I screamed out loud in a public place, like loudly. My next
Awesome.
thought was, I wish my dad was alive to see this. Not going to cry. My next thought was, there's hope for my daughter who turns 25 next week, that she might get a normal life one of these days, that she will be able to date again. It's really hard. It's like back in the early 80s or the mid 80s when you were going to go on a date, third date, you're like, okay, where's your HIV test? Now it's like you want to go on a date with someone. Okay, let's do the rapid COVID test before we go to dinner. It's so complicated to be a person who's not, as lucky as we are to be in these, committed relationships, and you don't have to wonder, for people who are single. And my daughter's lucky. She lives at home. She's finishing school. She was delayed due to a really bad meniscus injury and surgery. But for people, I know women, friends of mine, men that are friends of mine that are in their late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s. They did career first, and now they're trying to date with COVID. It's like, and they're alone. They were alone in lockdown. Some of them don't even have dogs or cats. That's how alone they were. I mean, that's insane. So I am so thrilled for our country. I am so excited. I mean, I don't even know the right word for Kamala Harris is a Indian Black woman who is going to be, she is our vice president elect, and she is a prosecutor, district attorney who cares about the rule of fucking law and not, I'm going to make this shit up as I go along. Because my job, and this is a great segue, is I work under contract with a large city's police department, trying to transition them to something called incident-based reporting. And it's something was announced actually when, I think Obama was still president. It's called NIBRS, and it's supposed to create the kind of police reporting that gives you information about what actually happened versus 4 things happened at this crime incident. We're going to talk about the one that's the most important, or the one that the police judged to be the most important. It was created to shed more light on hate crimes, violence against women, and child abuse, and specifically domestic violence, sexual assault. So right now we have what's called summary reporting. So if you have a hate crime that is also a robbery and an aggravated assault, the police will decide what they want to report. And if they only want to report the robbery, and a robbery actually includes assault, and they don't want to report any details of the hate crime, they can brush it under the rug because it's their decision. And they use what's called the hierarchy theory. There's no details required. With NIBRS, every single crime, they have to answer a yes or no, whether it was a hate crime. They absolutely, you can't submit without it. And the ultimate goal is that, and also it requires every department, from the smallest podunk department in Alaska to the largest one in the country, which is either New York or LA. I'm not sure, they're always in, who's got the biggest department, has to have a computerized record management system. Like, it's part of the requirement. And after, it's supposed to be February or January 1st, 2021, which is right around the corner. It's not a punitive system, but they're going to be coming after people slowly. And then eventually there'll be a punitive system where you won't be allowed to apply for federal grants. You have to start reporting NIBRS. And eventually the goal is, and I'm thinking 5 years down the line, maybe 10 years down the line, it will be an automatic system. You put a police report in, and it's going to go directly to the FBI. So they'll be getting this data immediately. Something that, Chris, you and I talked about earlier was Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. Mm-hmm. That report of his murder by 2 white supremacist motherfuckers sat on a desk somewhere in Georgia for 3 months before it ever went up the chain in the state. Now, in a situation like NIBRS, it never would have happened if we were on real-time reporting. It would have automatically gotten flagged for hate crime. It automatically would have gotten flagged that these people already worked there's no bias when a computer algorithm makes the decision for you.
Right.
You can't lie. And my experience is the younger officers want this. Older officers are afraid of computers. It's just the way it is. And it's the civilians within the department that interface with the mayor's office, with the city council, with the people that write the checks that are afraid of reporting more crime, more hate crime, more domestic violence, more child abuse, anything that's going to make the city look bad.
Sure.
Because it's all about the dollars and cents. Are people buying here? What are our property values? Do people want to come visit us? You know, let's hide away the dirty laundry and make us look like, you know, make our city look like the suburbs, make our suburbs look like a castle. And let's pretend that those areas, like you've been in DC, let's pretend that districts 6 and 7 don't even exist.
Exactly. All right. I remember we were talking earlier today, and you were saying that I think it was Alabama or Mississippi claims to have had no hate crimes for the last.
Yes, that's correct. Alabama.
Just like,
How is that
come
possible?
on. like literally nobody believes that.
Well, the story is, and I hope that no one that I work with from the FBI ever hears this, they took a grant for a NIBRS transition and basically never did it.
Ah, interesting.
So they're not really reporting. So that'll all be figured out eventually.
There's got to be enforcement, though. I mean, how do you deal with it?
That's way above my pay grade. I'm basically a subject matter expert in crime analysis, which is hysterical if you knew what I was like when I was younger. Christoph knows a little bit about what I was like when I was younger. So the crime analysis and the conversion of, or the matching of like criminal statutes and NIBRS codes and transition from the old way to the new way. And basically they have so much dirty laundry to hide in Alabama and Mississippi that they're like, there's no way, we're just not participating.
Well, that's it. You can design whatever kind of oversight system that you want, including things like body cameras. But if the cops turn off the body cameras or they don't fill out the report, then what good is it?
Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, for most places, they're so dependent on federal grants to provide things like bulletproof vests and training and funding for overtime, because most places don't have the budgets for their police forces that they need. And without federal grants, they wouldn't have the money to survive.
This is really important. This is a really great point. I want to talk about the Commerce Clause for a second, because this is how the entire federal government, though the federal government doesn't have direct power to regulate states in various ways, they have the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is basically the carrot, right? Because you're like, look, if you want our money, and we, by the way, have all of the money, then you have to act in X, Y, and Z way. But the important thing there then is that the federal government is interested in this stuff, right? So if you have Bill Barr running the Justice Department, right, he doesn't care about what cops are doing. In fact, he's encouraging them to be lawless.
Right. And actually, NIBRS was Comey's brainchild, believe it or not.
Interesting. That's interesting.
And so
Comey.
I know. And it's so funny because you're thinking like Comey's this bastard that ruined everything. But back in the day, and it's so funny because we watched that, my family, we watched the Comey rule, which was I kind of fell asleep during. But the thing about, Comey is that he actually had some really, really good ideas about policing. He just was a terrible politician.
Yeah.
And he didn't belong mixing with those people. But, when this came out, at the original conference where NIBRS was introduced to police chiefs, it was pretty well received at the executive level for police. It's the people that are really beholden to politicians that don't like it. Mm-hmm. So like the chief operating officers of large police forces that are like the civilian equals of a chief of police, who are terrified of what it's going to mean if they're reporting too many crimes.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, well, what's our public image going to be like? So it's very interesting, and I'll be very interested to see what happens after January 1st. So if you go on the FBI website and you search NIBRS, there's something called a Crime Data Explorer, where anyone, you, me, my dog, if he could use a computer, can look up crime stats for any city in the country that's already reporting. And find out how many hate crimes were reported, how many, murders. You can look at victim stats. You can look at criminal stats. You can look at anything that there is to look at that's being reported by places that are already live on NIBRS. And after January 1st, there's going to be a lot more places. The pilot studies, which I've been in on this for almost 3 years now. My first run was with Port Authority Police in Jersey City. I was at their tech center there, getting them ramped up. And now I'm with, DC Metro in Washington, DC, helping them to get ready. They got 400 very large and medium-sized police forces because they wanted a really good amount of data to go live with January 1st. But COVID and then the George Floyd thing put a lot of people behind in the bigger cities, because they had, first of all, a lot of people came to a halt during COVID. And then second of all, they had people who were unable to, if people were in the middle of training in June, all of that stopped, because depending on the level of First Amendment, activity that was happening, that's such a PC thing to say.
That is a very PC way of putting it.
Listen, I'm not going to call.
That is what it is, though. That's what it is.
I don't think they were riots. I think those protests were completely right. And if I wasn't still recovering from a really bad case of COVID, I would have been out there doing it too, but I was too sick to go. I was still sleeping 12 hours a day and trying to work the other 12. So yeah, I just wasn't able to physically be there yet. And it was 100 degrees. I could barely stand up outside. It was brutal.
It's important too, right? Speaking of the election, is that those, I know I'm a little off topic here, but it's not really, because we're talking about crime. We're talking about policing a little bit here before we go into the next topic. But those protests were, the argument from the right certainly was that you are turning off people, you're pissing off, moderates or whatever. But that also galvanized, I think, the Black community, right?
100%.
And the Black community is really, as Sean and I talked about earlier, really is what carried the Biden across and Kamala across the finish line in the end.
Absolutely. And, we were talking about the election. I was talking about Kamala. And one of the things that is so encouraging for myself in this topic and in the topics that we're going to be discussing is that, it was such an insult to hear the Trumpanzee talk about law and order. You don't know what law and order is. There is no law and order. And no one is talking about defunding the police. As a matter of fact, the whole point of incident-based reporting is to look at the areas where law enforcement and community programs need more funding so federal money can be put in that direction. You can't keep throwing good money after bad with broken window policing,
right?
And stop and fucking frisk, no matter what you want to call it. They call it stop and frisk in New York. You know what they call it? They call it the NEAR Act, Neighborhood Enforcement and something else in Washington. And I'm like, it's stop and frisk.
It's still stop and frisk.
It's still stop and frisk.
Yeah, knife euphemism. But the bottom line is police officers are still patrolling through minority neighborhoods and just arbitrarily stopping people. That's the bottom line.
Right. And, there's an epidemic all over in big cities where police, after George Floyd and after Black Lives Matter, really started making noise, and not because of defund the police, because they're embarrassed to be associated. There has been a rash all over of law enforcement officers that are good people quitting.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Well, some have been very good people that don't want to be associated anymore. And some are the really bad apples that don't want to get caught.
Yeah, right. They don't want accountability.
Right. They don't want accountability. And it's interesting because it's been before NIBRS is rolled out. I mean, I have to say that, body worn cameras are not like they're an issue in New York, but you can't turn them off at this department that I'm at now. Like you just can't turn them off.
That's the way it should be across the board.
100%.
100%. And there, I have to say that I have worked with now, I would say totally over my career in policing, 5,000 different police officers all together through training. And I would say that 90% of them are actually really good guys that want to do the job. Mm-hmm. And the push is from the civilian overseers that want them to hide things. Some of the 10% of them.
Fascinating.
Is that the police union? Is that the police union or what?
No, I really think it's listen, I think that we can definitely debate this on another show. I think that prejudice is taught. I think racism, not prejudice. I think racism is something that you inherit, that you grow up around it, and it's just like some people use Miracle Whip, which is disgusting, and some people use mayonnaise, and it depends where you're from.
We talked about this on our show about evolutionary psychology. Which
I listened to.
Tribalism is a built-in thing. I mean, we've always had it, and so it's just a matter if there is an incentive in your environment toward tribalism or away from tribalism. If you're raised to believe that Black people are a part of your tribe as a white person, that we're all Americans and we all belong, then you're not going to be as racist. But if you're raised to believe it's us and them, then that kicks right into your evolutionary heritage.
But how does that explain someone like, what's her name, Christoph? That woman that we talked about.
Black
Candace
woman? Oh, Candace Owens. Oh,
how does that explain her?
So that's a complicated question. We haven't fully unpacked that on this show, but one thing that is there are always groups. Here's the analogy, Ari. How about those Jewish people? Because I know you're of Jewish heritage. Jewish people who cooperated with the Nazis. Right? There's always some people, traitors, right? There are always some people who think that it's worth it to them for whatever reason, their self-interest. And for Candace Owens and specifically, right? If you're a Black person who's willing to speak up against progress and against against just sort of Black people, other Black people, and against the movement, you will get unbelievable press coverage. You will be the darling of the right. They will trot you out. And so there's people that are willing to compromise their values, right, in order to get that Omarosa. There's another one.
Oh,
right?
God, yeah.
It's a special ecological niche, right? I mean, because if you to a white supremacist organization, if you can find a person of color who agrees with you, like look at the leader of the Proud Boys. Leader of the Proud Boys is Latino.
He's a Cuban, right, or something?
Yeah,
like Cuban descent or something.
Well, they're special, the Cubans, from what I understand from other Latino people. Yeah. My boss at work she's Peruvian, and she's horrified by how the Cubans and Venezuelans are voted for Trump, and it's because they're like they're so close to it that somebody says the word socialism to them and they're all of a sudden they're terrified. Yes. I do have to say though, I was talking about it with my mom, who's a Holocaust survivor, as my dad was. And it's a false equivalency. The Jews in the camp that were given a choice to rat on other Jews, it was for an extra crust of bread and they were starving. It was for living another day. And there's a difference between saving your own life and doing it for self-aggrandizement. And I think that's a really different parallel.
I think that's an important distinction. Yeah. And really what I'm talking about is not in the concentration camps, right? I'm talking about a Jewish person in larger society, right, who calls out other Jews and says, oh, look, that's where they're hiding them, right? Like, right, who's out there, right, and I can't think of specific names right now, but I know that there were Jewish people, right, that never ended up in the camp in the first place because they were willing to sell out their compatriots. And then this is, and the equivalent is the House enslaved, the house slave who lives in the house, lives a good life, and rats out, attempts toward freedom or attempts for slaves to teach each other to read or whatever, all of which was illegal, of course,
Right.
But I think your distinction is a really important one, though, because we cannot blame people for trying to survive.
Yeah, I want to say when you're in the camps and your dignity has been completely stripped away from you,
exactly,
it's like a forced confession by these guys who are taken prisoner by Vietnam or North Korea. They trot them out in front of the camera. They're going to beat the shit out of them if they don't confess. And they've been tortured already. You're going to confess. There's just no way around it.
There's just no way, right? There's the human body. You just don't stand up to that. And look, we are, in the end of the day, and this actually is really interesting, and this gets to our evolutionary psychology discussion that we talked about in the episode that last 2 episodes ago, is that, right, we are animals, and in the end of the day, we will do whatever it takes to survive, right? Like that is, and so we are also, while we're wrestling with these big social issues, we are also at base animals trying to make it by. So if you are in a concentration camp, right, and you are like you said, you've been stripped of your dignity, right? You've been beaten to death. You've been starved to death practically. And then you get an opportunity for a crust of bread, right, that might save you or a family member. I mean, hey, look, right, we are animals in the end.
Right. Well, you're talking about survival. And it's interesting because one of the things that I've really been thinking about is, what is the difference between the millions of people who voted for Biden and Harris and the people who didn't? And the thing that I've been coming across is this terminal lack of empathy. And you talked about that a little bit in the show where you were talking about, those 7 qualities of people, and one of that are, decent. And one of them was empathy. I can't remember the term.
Better angels.
That's what it was. And, empathy is something that, and it doesn't matter where it comes out, whether it's, whether it comes out in that, I really see it a lot in, some of the people that are a little bit older than me. I'm a little bit older than you. I call it Gordon Gekko-itis. They're really pissed off that Trump didn't win because, what about my money? They won't admit that because they're so focused on their money, they're espousing racism or misogyny. That their daughters or maybe they've got grandkids, or maybe their daughters are my daughter's age. And that what they're saying is, I'm willing to allow a world where I'd be okay with a Handmaid's Tale for my daughter or her daughters or somebody else. I'll be okay with that as long as I get to keep my money.
Yeah.
Because the first word they think of when they get up in the morning is I, me, and mine.
Fact.
Well, and I can understand a Republican who's wealthy. What I can't understand are these poor redneck people who continually vote for the oppressor, who is robbing them blind.
Well, that's because they're racists.
Yeah, but it doesn't make any sense unless they're racist, because from a financial economic standpoint, it's terrible for them.
Yeah,
I know.
I think also, right, and I want to make sure that we cover this, is that you cannot, and we talked about this earlier, Sean, earlier in the show, and that is, we cannot discount the extent to which misogyny and patriarchy motivates voters, male voters in particular, of all races, of all creeds, right? Right. So the ability to control my wife, obviously not me, but whatever. So in the ability to control my wife is more important to me than my economic future. It's more important to me than the fact that I'm being a race trader, that I'm selling let's say I'm a Latino man, or I'm a Muslim man, and I'm willing to look past the bigotry, the outright bigotry, because Trump is going to defend my ability to dominate my family and my wife in particular. And this is, I think, really important in terms of domestic violence, right? Because I think that you cannot extricate these 2 issues. I don't think you can extricate those 2 issues.
No, definitely not. I think culture has a lot to do with domestic violence. And one of the things, it's very interesting, living in Morris County, which is, I've lived here on and off for my entire life. I was born in Union County. No, was that Union County? I was born in Union County, but we moved to Morris County when I was pretty young. And, but I've worked in and out of Hudson. I went to school at Rutgers. I lived in some other county that I don't want to talk about for like a short time, Sussex first, I think, or Warren. I don't know. I lived up in Alamucci for a hot minute.
Yeah.
Once for like a month. But seriously, like, we have all cultures. When I was doing my training as a sexual assault and domestic violence advocate, we were given culturally sensitive training about dealing with different cultures. And, I'll tell you, the hardest culture to penetrate was definitely Muslim or South Asian.
Mm-hmm.
As I've worked with a number of brilliant South Asian women, and it doesn't matter if they have 11 doctorates in the most in like nuclear physics and microbiology and, evolutionary biology. It doesn't matter. What at home, they are subservient, and it is like, it doesn't matter. I've never gotten, and all the times I answered a domestic violence hotline, I never got a call from a Muslim woman. I never got a call from a South Asian woman. Never.
What, do they just take it? They don't even report it?
Nope. Not in my experience. Now, I haven't done a call in about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I got calls from, it's interesting also in terms of the Latina community, certain Latinas, like I've gotten calls with women who are Colombian, Puerto Rican, Cuban, never, Guatemalan, yes, El Salvador, yes, Mexico, yes. It really depends where you, like, every culture is different. One of my
fascinating.
My first call ever that I ever went out to the hospital for to meet, a survivor was a woman who spoke no English. She was Colombian. She was being human trafficked for slave labor by a guy with a cleaning company. It was so difficult. And I was using Google Translate because I don't speak Spanish. I speak more Spanish now than I did then. It's one of those things I'll learn when I have like 5 minutes, and I should have done it over, but I was not in the shape over the, lockdown. And, it was, she came here, he was holding her visa and her papers, and she was working at this cleaning company. And then he sexually assaulted her and said if she told, that he wouldn't give her her green card. And she finally had enough, called the police. She ended up in the hospital. And that was it wasn't domestic violence, it was sexual assault, but that was my first call out on a sexual assault hotline call. And boy, oh boy, was that a something.
I'll bet
it was. That was at a time when I was barely prepared for human trafficking. One of the things that's really interesting about NIBRS and what's happened despite this administration is that human trafficking, any prostitution arrest now of someone under 18 is automatically human trafficking, which is amazing.
That's a win.
As it should be.
Yeah, as it should be. Although it's very interesting trying to have that argument with people that have been working in, police records for a really long time. They're like, oh no, it's not human trafficking if there's not a John. I'm like, yeah, it fucking is. Like, you don't need a John for someone to be pimped. Like they could just be being pimped without a John. Like, it's so interesting. Wow. And I find that very interesting with women that are my age and older than me, because like, it's not a victimless crime. It's a mindset. And I was thinking as I was getting ready and putting my makeup on, I was thinking like, wow, I bet you Chris and Sean aren't putting any makeup on. And well, I mean, it's totally okay if you did. But I was also thinking about how when I was a little girl, I loved Charlie's Angels. And I was little when that was on, like 7, maybe 6, maybe 5. And I remember thinking they would always put them in these really crazy situations where they had to wear these very sexy costumes.
Yeah, for some reason. Yeah, they have to wear the sexy costume, of course.
Right. Like
very
Farrah,
practical.
Very practical for them to be in like some like strip club. Yeah. Or I remember one where they were all in like, so I don't even know what it was. And And I was thinking, like, that's human trafficking. Like,
Yeah, right.
and I was thinking, like, no wonder we all grew up, women, thinking that we dress for men. We, like, there are these rules that we have to follow, that no matter what the situation, like, I'm, here, I'm very excited to talk about politics and crime and all that stuff, but I'm here to talk about domestic violence and abortion. And I'm like, I give a shit whether I have lipstick on. Like, really? It's like, and this is ingrained into us. And that is not evolutionary biology. That is environmental psychology. It's the environment of wanting to look like what we grew up with and what we saw, that we have to please the patriarchy. And that's why I said, fuck the patriarchy before, Sean, because
I say fuck the patriarchy, but I think also personal adornment of some kind. It differs from culture to culture, and sometimes it's the men who are adorning themselves. It depends. It's all very cultural, but adornment is something that has always raised people's social standing and gotten people attention, and from the opposite sex, all that sort of thing. So I do think that also there's a component of women dressing for other women in the sense of wanting to be accepted. It's a very complicated thing that you're talking about.
It is, absolutely. But what I was thinking about as I was doing it is, like, I'm going to do this thing that's really, it's interesting, because I had conversations with my family about what stuff I was going to talk about, because I wanted them to be prepared when they listen to it, especially my daughter, because there's things that she doesn't know that I might mention about me, and I wanted her to be prepared. And I was thinking how interesting it was that the things I'm going to talk about are so not lipstick and eyeliner.
Right.
And it's such a, I was, one of the things I'm really happy about, I sent Christoph an email the other day. On Friday, it was possible that the Supreme Court, such that it is right now, this is the other reason I'm really happy that our president-elect and vice president-elect will be taking office with or without the help of the current administration. I'm also super happy about the runoff elections in Georgia. Let's not forget about those two elections. Everybody give all your money to those folks. If you know anybody in Georgia, make sure that you remind them to vote. And if you know anybody who's turning 18 in Georgia before that election, make sure that they get registered to vote. We have the ability to, if we win even one, it'll be 48-49. We've got Bernie Sanders as an independent who votes with us usually. And Angus King in Maine backed Biden. He could vote with us, but Kamala Harris is the deciding vote in the Senate when there's a tie. So that's a very good thing. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but there have not always been 9 justices on the Supreme Court. There have been more.
If we want to expand the court, it would require the Senate. We have to hold the Senate. And that's what makes those two elections so important.
Critical.
Absolutely. And there have been times where there are people that say that there should be as many justices as there are district courts. And right now there are 13 district courts. So that's a good case for 13 justices, which brings me to this case that I was talking about. In Mississippi, there is one working abortion clinic, and they're trying to limit abortions to 15 weeks. And 15 weeks is kind of difficult. I mean, it's not a heartbeat law, but they're also bringing up the personhood thing. Like,
Oh, the fucking personhood thing.
The personhood thing. Like, your baby is a person at conception or when there's a heartbeat or whatever. But then they started talking about, well, some birth control can be, I don't even know what the pharmaceutical word is, but it's basically an abortion agent. Like, if you take enough birth control pills, you can cause a miscarriage or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
like, aren't there proposed laws out there where they say, even a miscarriage can be considered you can be prosecuted for a fucking miscarriage?
Alabama v. Jones.
Unfucking insane.
Yeah, they arrested a woman for murder because she had a stillbirth, and this was a Black woman. They said that they arrested her for murder because she had a stillbirth, and for someone decided that she wasn't sad enough. I don't know why the fuck they arrested her, but they arrested her for murder.
It's fucking bad shit.
It is bad shit.
And they're gonna go after birth control next. That's the logical progression.
That's what they're saying. They're saying that a birth control can is an abortion agent. And where that dovetails with the domestic violence is that, so I, in my first marriage, a long, long time ago, when my daughter was a baby, was my first, we call him the sperm donor. I can't even call him my first husband. He was abusive. He was physically abusive. He was emotionally abusive. And I was a very different person. I was not the badass feminista you see standing, although I was, and then I wasn't. And it's really interesting because I think what happens to us is that we're young and we have a lot of confidence, and then life kicks us around a little bit. And I was really young when I met him, but you trade in your beliefs for a little acceptance. And then all of us, and I think that all of us go through that, men and women. You trade in your beliefs for a little acceptance. And
as
then
a young person?
As a young person. And then you're like, how the fuck did I get here? Like, how did I go from keep your laws off my body and campaigning for Bill Bradley when he was in the primary? This is dating back to how old I was. I'm pretty sure it was 1988. So yes, that makes me 51. But I don't look it, so that's all that matters.
There
you go. And being in the first Take Back the Night March at Rutgers that ever happened, which was because there was a rash of rapes the first semester I was at college, and getting really involved with that. And I guess this will tie into the abortion thing. But I got really also heavily into, drinking and drugs because it was the 80s and that's what we did. And then it's like 1989, and I'm, partying it up, and it's the clubs in the city and whatever. And I get pregnant, and my parents are immigrants and they've built this great life, and I'm supposed to be, and I've got a full academic scholarship, and I don't know, I was drunk and high when it happened. And it's like, this is not part of your life plan. I had a life plan. My life plan was college and, doing the things. And, it wasn't even a question to me. I went to Planned Parenthood. Abortion does not happen at Planned Parenthood. In 99% of the states that Planned Parenthood option happens, they do a test, they give you medical care if you want it, and then they give you a referral if you want it, or you go out on your own. I decided with the guy that I thought might be the father that, because it was kind of a blackout thing, that I was going to go have an abortion. I didn't consult anyone. I didn't have anyone to consult. I wasn't going to go tell my parents. They were busy doing buildings, they got here in 1962. It was 1989. They were just starting to enjoy their life, and I wasn't about to bother them. So I just went and took care of it. And there were people protesting with horrible pictures, and there was it was awful. It was awful. And in suburban New Jersey, people were like, and they were like, and I'm like, yeah, I had to walk through the picket lines, and there's nobody to be like, there was no one there holding a sign like, you can have your baby and we'll take care of it for you, or we'll pay your medical bills, or whatever. I was a college student. It was way before Obamacare was like, we'll keep you on your parents' insurance while you're in college. I was like, I'm like some, $15 a month college insurance and I had the health center to get me my cough medicine when I needed it, when I got pneumonia every other week, because I was always drinking and outside in the rain at the end of the night at the bars. So, I had that abortion and I thought it didn't bother me. But it turned out that because of the noise from all those right to life groups on campus and everything that was around me, I had this noise in my head about what a horrible person I was. And by the time I, of course, started drinking more and doing more drugs to make the noise go away. And by the time I met my ex-husband, the sperm donor, I was such a douchebag. I really was convinced that I was a piece of crap, because of what I did. And it wasn't because I thought didn't grow up thinking that abortion was good or bad. I thought it was just, something that we got to choose. Like it was a choice, and I would not have been a good mother. I couldn't even remember to do my laundry on time. I used to have to go out and buy new underwear once a week because I could never remember to do my laundry. Like that's who I was.
Right.
And so I just was like, we dated, we moved in together. The first day we moved in together, he threw a couch at me. He was a very big, like football player kind of guy. And I'm like, I must deserve it because I'm a bad person. And that's kind of what being a 19-year-old and having an abortion and living in this world of negative messaging and without support. And things have gotten much better. And I'm not saying there might not have been support if I asked for it. But the messaging that women still receive from the mainstream Christian right garbage shit.
This is why we rail at the radical secular about religion, because that's all they're doing. They don't give a flying fuck about the fetus. They don't give a flying fuck about kids once they're born. No. All they're trying to do is recruit you through shame and set you up for a life of potential abuse where you feel so horrible about yourself that you're not able to stand up for yourself because of this indoctrination and brainwashing.
100%. So basically, it's very interesting because not long after we moved in together, I was on the pill and I got pregnant on the pill, and that usually doesn't end well. And I had a miscarriage. And I remember I was devastated because I thought it must be my fault. I must be being punished by God because I had a miscarriage, but it must be because I had an abortion. And then I had several years later. Yeah,
not you, but just like that mentality that gets thrown on women, that burden, the burden. And by the way, the entire burden of carrying the child is also right. Cause like the man, like where the fuck is he through all of this? Right. And right. So the burden would be on you to carry this baby, on you to upend your life. Right. And then you also get it from the other side. Cause you're like, I'm going to have an abortion. And then you got to feel bad about that too.
Yep.
Like what the fuck is that?
And this is the other thing. Men should really, really support abortion, because how many men would get stuck with child support payments and having to deal with all of this stuff if women couldn't get abortions? And this is something that Jordana had brought this up. She was a guest that was on our show a few months ago. And this is
I heard her.
Every man should be just ecstatic about abortion, because
they should take it out of your paychecks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the National Abortion Fund.
Yeah, exactly.
No doubt. And it happened again later that I had an even later in the pregnancy miscarriage, not dissimilar, because it turned out that I had, a hormone deficiency. And after that, my dad was like, okay, well, let's stop this shit and get you married. So we got married. And not long after that, and I just didn't know how to stop the train at that point, and I was drinking a whole ton. And somehow through all of this, it actually involved tequila and a blackout. I ended up with my daughter, which I would never, ever regret. But after she was born, it was interesting. After she was born, and this is where abortion and birth control access and domestic violence really dovetail. Once you have a child, I'm the rare exception. Once I had a child, I was like, I have to get the fuck out of here. But most women are but only because he was such an asshole. And I knew he wasn't mentally strong enough to fight me because I was so much smarter than him. And also there were witnesses. Other people had seen him hit me. Mm-hmm. One of my good friends, his brother. And I ended up taking her and leaving. It just, the stars aligned. And I literally was like, I literally took her under one arm and a suitcase under another. And I showed up. I had someplace to go also. My parents willingly took us back and let me start my life over. I went back to school. My mom used to take her to take daycare every day. I was so fucking lucky. Most women, especially of limited means, the minute a child comes into the picture, if they're not someone who grew up with a family like mine, I am so fucking blessed. And I don't use that word like the Jesus people. I mean, I am blessed to have grown up with a grandmother like mine who was a firebrand from the word go, with a father like mine who thought, to the end of time that I would walk on water. And mind you, even though he thought that I was the greatest thing since sliced bread, he still said, "Who's going to take care of you?" And I'm like, "Dad, I'm going to take care of me." And he was like, "All right." The bottom line is that most women without access to abortion and birth control end up with more instances. There's more instances of domestic violence. And I have some fun statistics for you. Hold on. Let me put on my glasses. I brought these up before we started. So where do you think this state is that has the most domestic violence?
It's definitely going to be in the Confederate States. It's the Confederate States for sure.
Alaska.
Huh.
Oh,
Alaska is notorious for violent crime and has the highest overall crime rate. Nearly 50% of all Alaskan English-speaking women have experienced intimate partner or sexual violence. Their population is less than 1 million people, and 50% of the women there have experienced domestic violence. The top 10 are Alaska, Oklahoma, Nevada, Washington State, New Hampshire, Maryland, South Carolina, Indiana, and Mississippi. Now, I don't know what New Hampshire's access to abortion and birth control is. I think it's probably pretty good, but the rest of those states have pretty stringent laws about getting access to birth control. Mississippi's one of the worst. I'm really surprised that Louisiana's not on that list, but Indiana, that's Mike Pence land. South Carolina, Florida. I don't know. That's not in the top 10.
Doesn't mean it's not in the top 20.
Florida's percentage is, hold on, where is it? I must have missed it. Florida, where are you, Florida? I don't see you.
Well, the reason
go ahead, John.
Oh, the reason I brought it up is I don't know if you all saw Brad Parscale getting arrested in Florida. And,
that was delightful.
Yeah, and what was most interesting about it, and this kind of dovetails the theory I have about domestic abuse. He was complaining to the cops that his wife hadn't had sex with him for months, and my theory is that many, if not most, of incidences of domestic abuse start out with women refusing sex and the man getting violent as a result. And I'm wondering if you think that's true, Ari.
No, I do not think that's true. I think that so there's a really interesting tool that we use to show people what domestic violence really begins as. And it's really about power and control. And it usually begins with a man wants to control a woman's whereabouts. Where are you going? Who are you talking to? What are you doing? So it starts a lot of times with isolation.
Which explains Alaska, by the way, right?
Yes.
Because, right, you're talking about potentially 70, 100 miles between you and the next person, right?
It starts with wanting to have control over what you see. Think about narcissism, too. Like a lot of these people are malignant narcissists who maybe they're not malignant narcissists in the way that Trump is with a big ego. They could be malignant narcissists who hate themselves.
Mm-hmm. Which I think Trump does hate himself.
Right. But sometimes malignant narcissists show themselves like Trump does. And sometimes they're like, you don't love me, you don't care about me. But either way, they are the only things that they think about. And everything that you do is all about them. So if you don't remember to get their favorite cereal, it's all about them. If you don't pay attention to every single thing they do, it's not that you have a headache or a stomach ache or just had a baby 2 minutes ago. It's somehow about them. Right. And usually it starts with isolating you from your friends and family. Then it's about everything that happens to them is your fault. Only the bad things, not the good things. The good things are their accomplishments. The bad things are your fault.
That sounds a lot like Trump.
Yeah. Then the next thing that happens is they somewhere in there, they've cut you off financially from having any kind of agency or ability.
Mm-hmm.
You have no way of escaping. Sometimes they take away the car keys or your ability to go anywhere. Sometimes they even make it difficult for you to, let's say you're responsible for getting the groceries. They don't give you enough grocery money. Then they get mad at you for not getting the right groceries. Then they make fun of you for not getting it.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a story from someone who was an abuse victim that about a guy actually disabling the car, like taking out the spark plugs, or
They don't want you
disabling
to get away.
Yeah.
You know what I'm thinking about, Ari, as you're talking, and I want to sort of try to connect this to what Sean was saying. Sean was talking about like withholding sex, but in my mind, that is the power like that you're talking about, right? Because in some sense, right? Because the idea is that like I'm demanding sex from this woman and she refuses to.
Yeah, it is a control thing.
The only control sometimes that women have at one point would be whether or not they give or
sex.
Don't give sex. But I think that a truly abused woman learns at a certain point that that's their only tool.
Mm-hmm.
And they use it to bargain, especially if there are children involved.
Sure.
Like to get, and I'm thinking about some of the accounts that I've read, to get more money in the budget to buy stuff for the kids, or just to get a little bit of peace. And so when they talk about, I remember Ivana Trump talked about marital rape.
Yes.
Marital rape.
That's something that I hate that got swept under the rug after all this, that like this woman credibly accused her husband, who at the time was a candidate for president, for raping her. And everyone just shrugs their shoulders and moves the fuck on. It's astounding that rape culture in this country is astonishing. It's astonishing.
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing is that in a state where birth control and abortion are not accessible, rape culture thrives.
Right.
Because why would you need birth control or access to abortion if, sex is, not your option? Like, sex is not your choice. I mean, when I first started learning about criminal code in different states, one of the first NIBRS guides, different states have different NIBRS guides, and there's a crosswalk between different criminal codes in one state to the federal crime codes. And I'm reading Kansas's NIBRS guide, and I'm like, what the fuck is forcible rape? Like, isn't all rape forcible? Like, like what? Voluntary rape? Is that like
right?
No,
is that like role play? Like, what do you?
Fuck?
Is that like when you like it rough? I mean, what the fuck?
Wow.
And forcible rape, and then there was another one that had something to do with. There was
legitimate rape. Like if a woman.
Oh no, they talked about forcible rape, and then there was something else that had to do with incest. That was not like some sort of like mitigator of the term of incest. And I'm like, I can't. I remember I walked away from my desk and I went and called my girlfriend, who is a former prosecutor and wrote the domestic violence policy for Union County, New Jersey, when she was a prosecutor there. And I'm like, I'm going to vomit. I can't read the code from Kansas anymore. And she's like, I don't know what to tell you. In New Jersey, even in New Jersey, certain sex crimes were misdemeanors until our current attorney general changed them.
Sure.
They were just plain old misdemeanors. And
Well, this goes to show, I mean, the patriarchy and the misogyny that is woven into this country, and you cannot separate that from religion. We talk about this all the time on this show, right? Because it's the idea that women's job is to be subservient to men and baby makers, right? And under the thumb and control of men. And there is something super patriarchal about that. But religion is the ultimate patriarchy, right? Right? Abrahamic religions are the ultimate patriarchy.
Well, religion has also set up this idea of soil. The man is the seed, the woman is the soil. It's so there's
terrible. I mean, if you've ever read Anita Diamant's The Red Tent, so this is a really interesting book, and it kind of takes this biblical piece of, it's the book of Ruth, and it takes Ruth and her women. I think it's Ruth, but I could be wrong. I read it a long time ago, but it talks about the red tent, which is the tent where women went during their time of the month and basically were safe from men.
Wow.
And how this is how women taking care of each other, how they would hide someone who was trying to, how the camaraderie and the care of one woman for another became such an important thing. It's where women went to have babies, where women went when it was their time. And I wish I could remember all the details, but it's a very interesting perspective. And it's the perspective that you don't see, biblically. It was really like, all you get is, and this one begat that one. And how do you think that happened? Like, there's no, and the thing is that, and the children stayed with the women until, of course, girl children were big enough to, start getting involved in what the men had planned for them. And boys were big enough to get involved with what the men were doing. Mm-hmm. And there's no safety for women, in the patriarchy. There's no safety. And one of the things that's so terrifying for me, that was really terrifying for me, and as I've read about different, I guess I consider them to be cults like the Amish and the Mormons, is how young they start.
Oh, it's so sick. It's so disgusting.
11, soon as puberty, and it's immediately they're just
or
right
before, depending on what they're into.
Yeah, Roy Moore type style.
It's really horrific, but I think that here in our modern society, our girls are socialized to the sexuality of our society at an incredibly young age. And I'm not like, listen, you know me, I'm a girly girl. I like makeup and clothes and high heels and all that kind of stuff. But when I see, a 5-year-old that wants to wear high heels and makeup, even when her mom doesn't, because she sees it on TV, and she's already learning to basically pimp herself out for one reason or another, that makes me scared. It makes me scared that she's not more interested in the joy of being alive than the joy than making herself look like something, like someone who's attractive to a man.
Yeah.
And that's because our society is still so male dominated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also think it's really interesting that women are taught to hold their pain.
Oh my God, yes.
In a way that men would never tolerate.
Absolutely.
Some men will tolerate it, but women are really taught to hold their pain. And, here's an interesting story with regard to miscarriage and abortion. 10 years ago, my husband and I got pregnant, and unfortunately, I lost the baby. And my mother-in-law, who is a Walmart shopping, she'll never listen to this, so I don't care. She is a Walmart shopping, really like a limited, not really well educated. She voted this year in the election for the first time in her life. She had never voted before because she always complained about this different stuff. And my husband said to her, stop talking to me about stuff in politics and the world. If you're not going to vote, you don't get to talk.
Mm. Right. Very good.
And she said to me, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? Like, what did you do?
When you mean when you lost the baby, when you lost
Yeah, she's like, what did you do? Like, how did you make that happen? And I think one of the things that I hate the most, so 52 or 53% of white women voted for Trump, which
they're the fucking worst.
Fucking yak right here on this beautiful new microphone.
Well, this is the flip side of intersectionality we have to really talk about, because we is the breakdown in these, people voting against their interests, whether it's women.
Well, this is the same as poor people voting for Trump.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
He wants to take away your Medicare, your Medicaid, mm-hmm. your food stamps. Social Security,
slugs for salt, right? Like, right, yeah. Right. This is like
vampires for garlic.
Exactly. Like, what the fuck? Vampires for garlic. That's another. I've heard that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, really. Like, what's up with that?
What the hell is that?
Right.
Look, we're winding down. Frankly, but I know this has been a great. We've been talking for like almost an hour now. Believe it or not, It doesn't feel that way at all. It feels like we've been talking for 20 minutes, but I got a timer up here, and it's been almost an hour. Jeez. And by the way, I started it late. Okay. Yeah. So we've been having a good conversation though. So all right, so it's been really awesome. So what are your final thoughts, Ari? Like, what's the takeaway? What do you want our listeners to come away with from this conversation?
This is difficult.
That's not an easy question. So, I sprung it on you. So,
okay. So I would like them to come away with the fact that we are on the cusp of one of two things: civil war, or no, we're on the cusp of some healing, and that's amazing. But there's a lot of people in our country that still do not understand that it's not just about me. It's not just about me and the 6 feet of space around me, that everyone is affected by the way that we vote and the things that we do. And also that we may go into another lockdown. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know you, Christoph, live kind of like you're in lockdown. I do too, to a certain extent anyway.
Sean does too. Yeah.
We've been locked down since March.
Since March.
Yeah, me too. Domestic violence has risen probably 25 to 35% since Trump has taken office, because people, just like racism and acts of hate, have risen, specifically anti-Black and anti-Semitic acts. It is up to you, everyone who's listening. It's up to all of us to do what we can to make people understand that these are not acceptable. We can't just say, oh, another shooting. Oh, another, the day of the election, there was a Jewish cemetery that was, desecrated in Michigan by Trump people. It's disgusting. There's, if you think there's someone in your life that's suffering from, relationship violence or relationship, not even physical violence, but just relationship marginalization, they need help. There's resources out there. It doesn't have to get to that point. And quite frankly, being abused in a relationship doesn't start with hitting. It starts with being told that you're the reason everything's wrong. And making you feel like by the time you get punched or hit or pushed, that you've earned it.
Wow.
And if you need help, there is help to be had. I will make sure that there's resources for the show notes. So if people do need help or need help for other people, that they can get it. Unfortunately, in a lockdown situation, the angrier that we get, the more stunted we feel, the more frustrated we are at our situation. Because listen, I want to go to the mall and not wear a mask. I want to go to a movie and see it on a big, big screen. I want to go hang out with Christoph and Lindsay and see their cats. I want to do some stuff. I want to go to the city for dinner tonight. Yeah. It's beautiful out. And I can't. I'm lucky to be in a really great relationship, but not everybody is. And some people don't know what to do with their frustration, and people have lost jobs and their finances are really, really tough. And some people, and women are not the only ones being abused. There's in 25% of, certain situations, there are men that are having abuse. In same-sex relationships, there's a lot of abuse. There's help, and remember that it doesn't start when you get hit. It starts when you're being gaslighted. And we all know what it's like to be gaslighted. We've been being gaslighted for 4 fucking years.
The entire country.
The whole goddamn country. So I guess that's my message, is that domestic violence is not something you see on a Lifetime fucking movie. It's awesome. Everywhere, all around. And the right to have our biology left alone by their theology is something we're going to have to continue to fight for. Please remember the Georgia runoffs. Donate what you can to those 2 elections. And I'm sure that you guys will put that in the show notes too. And I don't know. It was so great to be here. I really am looking forward to wearing a different t-shirt and coming back to talk about some other stuff. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ari. It was really a great conversation. You really, I think, hit on a lot of interesting points, I think. And look, thanks so much for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Ari was just an amazing guest. I think it was a really useful conversation. What do you think, Sean?
I really enjoyed that. I mean, she really brought a lot of things into perspective that you don't think about as a man, right?
Exactly. And look, during our news segment, we were talking about the importance of women's contributions and the importance of Kamala Harris as representative of that. And I'm really happy that we were able to get that perspective. And I think just such a personal, heartfelt conversation about the sort of the challenges that women face with abortions, with domestic violence, and I really loved how she talked about domestic violence doesn't start when he hits you, right? Domestic violence starts when he takes away your power, when he starts to box you in, and as Kamala Harris would say, I'm speaking.
Yeah, and I think I just want to inject a little note here because we always like to rip on religion, and with good reason, because religion has set women up for this situation. It has told men that they are the head of the household, that they get to say whatever they want, and that goes. They are essentially God in the household, and a godly woman will submit. And this is the whole problem that we've gotten into with the People of Praise and Amy Coney Barrett. This is a woman who is owned by her husband. Why is she on the Supreme Court? I just can't. This is literally the dynamic. She is involved in a dynamic that is similar to abused women. And we can't say enough about that. In that this dynamic of the patriarchy is the entire enchilada, because if we don't deal with it, we'll elect another Donald Trump.
Absolutely. I think that is a really, really great segue. I'm sorry, closing, because I think that really does a great job of sort of wrapping together exactly connecting it to what we do here on the Radical Secular, right? We are all about pushing against that hierarchy, that arbitrary hierarchy, that sort of that unearned power that traps us as an entire society, as a culture, but certainly women. And so it's been a really, really great show, a ton of fun as usual. Look, I want to remind everyone to make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash the fuck out of that red subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host, and write us a review over at Apple. Positive podcast reviews at Apple help us grow in the recommendations list faster. And also tell your friends and family about the show. Word of mouth definitely matters. And check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. The link is in the bio. And look, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ari. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.